My preparation for Megavalanche was completely different. I spent most of the winter training for cross country. I've only had 4 bike park days. I've done 7 cross country races and only 1 enduro. And that enduro was not exactly confidence inspiring.
I would say I am not where I want to be yet descending speed-wise.
But somehow this untraditional training plan really worked for me, and despite getting stuck in a fence 30 seconds into the race, I was able to finish top 10 in my first ever Megavalanche. Let's talk about it. I'm Mackie, and this is my wife Sid. We're both professional mountain bikers, and on this channel we share our exploits racing all kinds of races all over the world. We want to race the best races, regardless of the discipline, and be well-rounded mountain bikers, capable of taking on any challenge, whether that's racing for 12 hours straight, you're doing great, you're amazing, or riding down a glacier. In this video, I'm going to share how I trained for Megavalanche, why I think it worked, and what I think many people get wrong when preparing for this event.
You actually ended up being very well prepared, to the surprise of pretty much everyone, yourself included. I think it's safe to say that the way that you prepared for Megavalanche was probably different than pretty much everyone else you were racing against. And that's why we wanted to make this video, because not only was it different, you actually ended up being very well prepared for the race, to the surprise of pretty much everyone, yourself included.
Myself included. Part of that was not completely understanding what the course looked like, or like what Megavalanche was like, until I got there. The videos are so focused on the glacier and like the downhill, and those are a big part of it. The glacier was very intimidating when I got to practice on it.
Wow, that is intimidating.
Huh?
That is intimidating.
It's so scary. Probably important for people to understand that you also raced enduro for a long time.
I started off my racing career racing cross country back in the early 2000s. And then in 2013, I transitioned to enduro because I thought it was a really cool format. I was super excited about it, and spent a lot of time learning to corner, learning to descend well, learning to jump. Spent a lot of time working on those skills so that I could be a good enduro racer. The last few years have been more focused on cross-country fitness, but I do have a background of having trained for enduro seriously, having raced 20-something Enduro World Series rounds back in the day. So I do have that background, which obviously was very important for this race, but those skills were not what got me the result I got.
Even with your enduro skills being maybe a little rusty, like obviously you're a very good descender, but you had what, like 5 park days before Megavalanche? 4?
Yeah.
4 bike park days, like 4 days riding the big bike.
Yeah. No, I was definitely rusty going into it.
And we did like a little bit of enduro last year, but not a lot, and we haven't raced EWS since 2018. So definitely like very different skill set than you had, but I also think like it's possible you did better at Megavalanche 2024 than you would have done if you had done it, you know, in 2018, which was like your best enduro year.
Yeah, I think that's quite possible.
I feel like there are gonna be people that are surprised by that, and that's why we wanted to make this video and talk a little bit about it, because I think a lot of people go into a race like Megavalanche and don't have a very good understanding of what it is and what it isn't. I say that's definitely true for me. I think it was true for you as well. And a little bit of that stems from, I think we kind of colloquially call this discipline like mass start downhill. And you even said, like, before you went, you were like, I watched some videos, it doesn't seem like there's that much pedaling, like I just need to do some long descents and da-da-da, but that wasn't really the case.
I think the thing that sort of gives that away, if you have never been to Megavalanche before, is the fact that they call themselves a mass start enduro, not a mass start downhill. Especially when Megavalanche started, which was almost 30 years ago. I think it started in 95.
There was pedaling in enduro back in the day.
Basically, there was pedaling in enduro.
Which you wouldn't know from racing any enduros in the US in 2024.
There are some pedaling sections, and those sections make a big difference in the results.
And I think also the fact that it's 40 to 45 minutes long makes a really big difference, because you were racing against some people who like, no offense, but like in a 2-minute downhill race, they would probably like wipe the floor with you,
100%.
for sure.
100%. Yeah, I mean, we were talking World Cup downhill racers. Like, they're extremely talented descenders. Extremely talented descenders.
It's almost a different skill set for a 2 to 3 minute race because you are more accustomed, I think, probably to taking more risks, both with your equipment and your line choice and all that, because you have to, because every second counts. Whereas I think some of the racing you've done this year kind of counterintuitively actually prepares you very well for a 45-minute descent. I'm just thinking of like the first stage of Moab Rocks. Like, there's not many similarities between the whole enchilada and Megavalanche, except for the fact that it's 45 minutes of descending. You're trying to preserve your energy, you're trying to preserve your tires, there's pedaling in the middle of it, like high VO2 efforts, trying to keep up with Jeff Kabush.
It's a really good point.
Like,
the terrain is very different, but the race, like, that effort is very similar.
Much more similar to Megavalanche than, say, a 2-minute downhill race on a World Cup course.
With a long race like Megavalanche, it really helps to be able to descend while tired, to be able to be consistent for 45 plus minutes, and, you know, just to not fatigue over that amount of time, which are all things that cross-country training really helps with.
As we were saying earlier, it's also not all downhill.
Yeah.
And I think that is a point that is kind of missed by a lot of people, it seems like, who go to do Megavalanche.
I didn't realize it.
Yeah, like, we both watched the videos. We're so distracted by the glacier and the rocky sections that it just doesn't seem like there would be much advantage for pedaling hard.
I talked to, you know, a lot of the guys I was racing with, and I was surprised before the race even started how much energy and focus people were putting on these climbs, which started to make me feel better, because I was like, oh, well, if people are really worried about these climbs, like, that's an opportunity for me to be able to go really hard and to get by some people. But that's not really something you get from watching the videos of Megavalanche, because a GoPro effect is a thing, and you can't really tell like how steep things are down or up. So like, you're like, oh, well, they seem to be pedaling here, but like, it's probably not that steep. And it's not like a long climb, in that the longest one is about 2 minutes. And like, I would not consider that a long climb, but for a downhill race or an enduro race, that is a very long climb, and it makes a big difference if you can go really, really, really hard for 2+ minutes.
And I will say that something that XC racing, especially because we're usually seeking out XC races that do have good descents, and you do end up with situations where you go from a hard descent into like a 2 to 5 minute VO2 max effort. And so that's just something that you were really well prepared for. You were able to lay down how many watts?
According to my data, it was like 420 watts for 2 minutes average. Yeah. It peaked out at close to 1,000. It was like 970. You go in and then you start sprinting, and then you settle in slightly, and then you sprint again at the top.
Something that I really noticed from watching the footage is the passing. And I think this is something that people don't talk about with a race like this, because there's so much focus on the downhill skills, which is obviously really important. But the reality is all of the good passing spots were either flat or uphill after that first. Obviously, like, there's the glacier, which you guys didn't race this year, and then that whole open section that you had at the beginning, tons of passing there. But once you get into the single track, your best and safest opportunities to pass were all climbs or flats.
And partially that was because they were wider. But also because the speeds are slower. Because like, some of the downhill single track is fairly wide, and theoretically you could get past somebody, but to actually execute a pass, what do you think? You probably have to be going like 10 to 20% faster than the person. Like, you have to be going noticeably faster, because if you only make it part way by,
It's
they're
dangerous.
just gonna, it's dangerous, and they're just gonna come back in front of you and like not let you pass. But when the speeds are slower, it's easier to like have that difference in speed, which allows you to execute a pass successfully. And that's why for me, basically all the passing happened on the climb and the flats.
Because you got around
Yeah.
that guy in the white jersey, which was a classic example of that. Like you were probably like 3% faster than him or something. Like you clearly wanted to go faster, but there was no way you were going to get around him.
Yeah. There was no place to do that.
And you were able to be patient because you knew you were stronger on the climbs. A real problem for someone who goes into a race like Megavalanche and isn't strong on the climbs is you either have to, like if your advantage is on the descent, and this is just from me watching the footage and not doing the race, but like it was pretty clear that you have to start taking some risks to pass on the descent if you want to capitalize on your advantage there. That's dangerous, that's risky, maybe you're offline, maybe you get a flat because you're trying to pass somewhere you shouldn't be, you crash, da-da-da-da-da.
The safest and, I mean, easiest in terms of like ability to make, like to execute a pass is always gonna be when it's wider and when it's slower.
I think what's really interesting and funny to me is I think both of us have been on the opposite side of that situation when XC racing. And so I think we're able to recognize that because in an XC race, when you're faster on the descent, A, you better be way faster because it's hard to get around people. And B, sometimes you make mistakes when you pass, which result in a crash or a flat or whatever. Before my climbing got better in XC, I would always just like go so hard on the descents because that was the only place that I could make time. It meant I did more crashing in races, meant I made more mistakes.
And when you got to the pedally parts, you were more gassed.
Right.
Like you were working so hard on the descent to try to make up time that when you got to the pedally parts, you were done.
It just isn't a good strategy for mass start racing at all. So it was really interesting to see you get to be on the opposite side of that. And essentially, like I could tell you were able to be patient, you were able to be conservative, you were able to ride within your limits for the descents and then get around people on the climbs, which is just like, that's smart racing. Okay, so now that we've talked about why XC fitness is helpful for Megavalanche, what did you do to prepare for this race? And I think we can give kind of the Cliff Notes version is that you raced EWS for 7 years and then you spent the last 4 years building
on my fitness.
Building on your XC fitness. But specifically this year, what's kind of been the overarching plan?
The races I was preparing for were generally at least cross-country length, meaning 90 minutes plus, and most of them were longer than that, actually, most of the events that we've done and are preparing for. Being comfortable riding and not just like being outgoing slow, but like going fairly hard for 90 plus minutes, I think made a big difference. Because then I was like, 45 minutes, like no problem. Like my heart rate can be up in the like 160s for that entire time because racing downhill is hard. And like, so I can be running like a race pace heart rate for that amount of time and not fatigue or not fatigue as much as the people around me.
Part of that is overall training volume.
Yeah.
Obviously, I would say we did increase our training volume this year. Some more weeks in that sort of 15 to 18 hour range. Instead of doing some that were really big, we just did more that were bigger than average. And that obviously makes a 45-minute race like, yeah.
The other part is a certain number of VO2 max intervals. And for those not familiar with that terminology, VO2 max is essentially your like highest range above your threshold, the effort you can sustain for an extended period of time. So this is above that. Your heart rate is getting high enough that you will not be able to sustain that for more than 3 to 6 minutes.
All right.
Oh, wow.
I about passed out in the last one too.
I did a certain amount of those, and that was perfect because the longest climb at Megavalanche was 2 minutes. And in that 2 minutes, like I made 6 spots. I went from 16th to 10th. Which is a lot.
Yeah, and that's 6 spots in the top 20 too. That's not like at the beginning you were making.
Oh yeah, there was chaos on the first snow part.
And we should clarify that you're well aware that the thing you need to work on the most is your start.
Yeah.
But that was an oversight more than a flaw, lack of power. So basically, threshold work, zone 2 work to allow you to get that kind of training volume, and then the VO2 on top of that to be able to do 400 and checks notes. 400 and how many?
I think it was
420 watts for 2 minutes. For the people watching this video, I suspect a lot of people might be kind of tempted to be like, oh, well, that's all good for you, Mackie, that you do XC training, but you raced enduro for years. Like, I should go to the bike park. I should work on my skills. What would you say to that? Like, how would you advise the average amateur to prepare for Megavalanche?
Honestly, I still think fitness is going to be the thing that's going to help you the most. And I say this because I talked to a lot of people, both other pro riders who I was racing with and also people who were there to like experience Megavalanche. And for most, basically everybody I talked to, I can think of maybe one exception, more fitness work would have hands down been the most beneficial for them. Yeah, it's a long descent. You want to like spend some time at the bike park. You want to do some long descents, getting your forearms and your hands used to like descending for that long. But if you just in general are fatiguing after 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, it's going to be a really long race. And if you can go out there and be like, I know what 45 minutes feels like, it's short, that's going to help a lot. And because pretty quickly, I would say like most of us sort of landed in a spot where the people around us were descending about the same speed, which makes passing on the descents, like we were talking about earlier,
hard.
Almost impossible. And so the way to make passes when everybody around you is descending the same speed is to make them on the pedally parts.
We obviously have a lot of race experience across a lot of disciplines, and for a race that's 45 minutes long for the pros, for starters, so that means probably a lot of people are in an hour 15. Like, your skills are really only as good as your skills are good after an hour. Like, that is the metric for a race like that, because it doesn't really matter what you could do in the first 2 minutes if you crash and hurt yourself at 57 minutes.
Yeah.
Or if you slow down a ton after the 30 minutes. So I would say, obviously, if anyone's interested in doing Megavalanche, that kind of implies that they have ridden a big bike, have some experience in a bike park.
Yep.
If you have a limited time to prepare, you're probably better off doing fitness work so that you can preserve the skill set that you do have for the entire race. So you can take advantage of the skills that you have at an hour, as opposed to, okay, maybe I'm better at like hitting a drop 3 minutes in.
Yeah, exactly. Like, going to a bike park can be helpful for like the arm fatigue, but so many people, when they're at bike parks, they'll ride for 2 minutes and then they'll stop, and they'll ride for 2 minutes and they'll stop. Like, even if the bike park has 6 minute, 8 minute runs, they do it in 2 minute sections. So like, if you're going to go to a bike park, do the whole run. Practice like non-stop descending. If you live somewhere where you can get to big long descents,
even if they're not the most technical, even if you're like, this is not as hard as Megavalanche, it doesn't matter. That's good practice.
If you can do a 40-minute, hour-long descent and practice not stopping for that, that's going to make a huge difference, because then when you're in a race setting and you're trying to not stop on a 42 hour to hour 15 descent, you know what that feels like. Your body is more prepared for that.
I felt like watching that footage, like, you could have kept going. Like, if they had given you an hour and a half of descending, like, you would have still been reeling in spots.
Oh,
like,
it would have
been amazing. It was too short for you.
So there you have it. Why I'm pretty sure that training for cross country was integral to my 8th place finish at Megavalanche and would be beneficial for anyone who wants to have a successful and fun race at that event. I hope you enjoyed this analysis, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss next week's video, where we head to Downeyville, California for the Downeyville All Mountain World Championships. We'll see you there, and in the meantime, don't forget to be more awesome.
420 watts for 2 minutes. So you could keep up with Pogacar for 2 minutes if you weighed 30 pounds less. He would struggle on the glacier, I think.
Yeah, I think.
Hopefully.
Yeah.